Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to unpack the incredibly multifaceted reality of migrating to the United States in 2026. We are looking at the massive economic opportunities drawing people from all over the globe, the completely tangled web of bureaucracy they have to navigate just to get there, and perhaps most importantly, the unspoken human and psychological costs of actually making that journey. If you've ever found yourself wondering what it truly takes to uproot your entire life and succeed in a new country today, well, this is exactly what we're breaking down. So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start off by exploring the 2026 opportunity landscape, then we'll navigate those tricky new immigration rules, uncover the hidden costs of success, talk a bit about acculturative stress, and finally, redefine what immigrant resilience actually means. Let's kick things off with the big draw, the 2026 opportunity landscape. Now, the financial incentives driving migration to the U.S. right now are absolutely massive. We are talking about top-tier salaries straight across the board. You've got corporate CEOs pulling in anywhere between 150,000 to 250,000 pounds, surgeons earning 90,000 to 120,000 pounds, and data scientists easily securing 60,000 to 90,000 pounds. Whether you're looking to break into corporate leadership, advanced healthcare, or the totally booming tech sector, those sheer monetary rewards for highly skilled professionals are a huge primary catalyst for global talent looking to relocate. But this financial pull, it builds into the future. It's really not just about today's salary, it's about job security over the next decade. We are seeing staggering expected growth rates between 2026 and 2035 for future-proof industries. We're talking a 32% growth rate for cybersecurity analysts, 30% for renewable energy engineers, and 28% for data scientists. The U.S. market is expanding incredibly fast in AI, green energy, and IT security. So for an immigrant who's weighing the risks of making a massive move, these numbers don't just mean money. They represent real, long-term stability. Which brings us to the practical side of things, navigating the new immigration rules. Because getting to those high-paying jobs requires conquering a very specific and, frankly, very dense bureaucratic maze. The good news is the 2026 policy updates are specifically tailored to attract and retain the highly skilled professionals and international students we are just talking about. We're seeing a push for actual transparency in the incredibly competitive H-1B lottery system. And for international students, particularly those coming from high-export countries like India, there is a major focus right now on improving F-1 visa processing and expanding OPT, or optional practical training. Plus, there are ongoing efforts to finally reduce those notorious green card application backlogs and give more work flexibility to dependent visa holders. The system is definitely complex, but the focus right now is clearly on streamlining that pipeline for skilled talent. However, understanding the rules, that's really only half the battle. Surviving the maze requires very specific preparation, because meticulous paperwork is what actually gets you through the door. You literally have to stay glued to official USCIS announcements, because the rules shift constantly. Preparing document authentication, things like your transcripts and birth certificates, has to happen incredibly early. Applying through the proper channels and seeking professional assistance are absolute musts to avoid missing a single document that could easily derail years of planning. Bureaucracy, as we all know, does not forgive a lack of preparation. But once you're through that door, we need to talk about the hidden cost of success. 75%. Think about that number for a second. That is the percentage of Indian Americans who hold at least a bachelor's degree. It's a stat that gets thrown around a lot to highlight the success of the roughly 5 million South Asians currently living in the U.S. It's basically the hallmark of the so-called model minority myth, this idea of a community defined perfectly on paper by high educational attainment and median household incomes that just completely exceed the national average. But we really have to pause and ask ourselves, do these success statistics actually capture the psychological cost of migration? When we are only looking at the advanced degrees and those big salaries, what are we missing? There is a really stark contrast here between the expectation and the reality of the immigrant experience. On the one hand, sure, we have the external proof of success, the thriving careers, the high incomes, but flip that over, and you see the internal hidden stress. A lot of immigrants, even the highly educated ones, experience downward occupational mobility. Basically, their credentials from their home country get invalidated, and they're forced to start completely over. They face this very subtle, language-based marginalization and profound social isolation. And because of that exact model minority narrative we mentioned, there's immense pressure to just keep up appearances and endure all of this stress in complete silence. This deep internal burden actually leads us into the concepts of acculturative stress and isolation. There is a clinical term for this, Acculturative stress. It's the very real emotional strain of adapting to a completely new culture, learning unspoken social norms, navigating subtle language hurdles, and often facing straightforward discrimination. Research heavily links this specific type of stress to increased anxiety and depressive symptoms. And because mental health conversations are still pretty stigmatized in many cultures, a lot of immigrants rely on emotional suppression just as a survival tactic. They literally postpone their feelings. They convert their anxiety into productivity, and they just do what needs to be done to survive. Take, for example, the incredibly poignant story of Dr. Vishwani Sahai Siddiqui's father. He arrived in the U.S. in the 1980s. This is a man who had 2 master's degrees and a law degree. He was entirely fluent in English. And yet he had to go back to school, pivot into a totally new career, and build his professional identity from scratch. And along the way, people actually suggested he shorten his very Indian name to make it fit better. As she asks in the source material, what does it do to a person to be told that their very name is inconvenient? Fluency, as it turns out, is definitely not the same thing as belonging. Then there's this other profound concept, ambiguous loss. It's grief without closure. Think about it. When you migrate, your homeland still exists, but you're no longer part of its daily evolution. Your family is still there, but at a really painful distance. The author shares this striking story about her mother traveling to the U.S. with a 9-month-old baby, leaving behind this incredibly communal, village-like support system of South Asian motherhood, only to suddenly face profound, solitary isolation in a new country. It's that strange duality of being so deeply grateful for the new opportunities, while simultaneously silently processing an unspoken, ongoing grief. Which brings us to our final point, redefining immigrant resilience. So what does this all mean? What does resilience actually look like on the ground? And this brilliantly illustrates the reality. It is not just the glamorous finish line of landing that high-paying tech job. True resilience is the incredibly humbling act of retaking basic licensing exams after you already have years of prior training. It's quietly working a survival job to pay the rent while you study late into the night. It's having the sheer grit to rebuild your identity in a totally unfamiliar place, while somehow maintaining your cultural rituals and, very often, sending money back home to your family. This is the invisible scaffolding that actually builds a family's stability. Reflecting on her own husband's journey, the author notes, there is little glamour in retaking exams. There is no applause for survival jobs. Because starting over is rarely this big, dramatic movie moment. It's repetitive. It is humbling. But more than anything, it is this profound act of persistence and love, undertaken specifically so that the next generation won't have to face those same barriers or shorten their names just to fit in. Between 2 homelands lies sacrifice and transformation. For the modern immigrant to truly thrive, they have to master an unbelievably complex landscape. They have to secure highly competitive jobs, they have to meticulously navigate constantly shifting immigration policies, and they have to do all of that while simultaneously managing the heavy mental health burdens of acculturative stress and ambiguous loss. So we want to leave you with this final, provocative question. Will you honor the resilience of the immigrant journey not just as silent endurance, but as a story told in full? True success isn't just a high salary or getting that visa approved. It's the incredible human courage required to build a life between 2 homelands. Thank you so much for joining us on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and we'll see you next time.